everyone. This is another episode of, actually we decided to talk about this. This is Discovering Autism. It still is Discovering Autism. And I have, again, Dr. Natalie Engelbrecht and Martin Silvertant and me. And my name's Tom. And we are going to...
Terrific, Tom.
Say again. What? What, Tom?
I said terrific Tom, or tremendous Tom, or
trouble
something.
Tom is what you had said originally.
No, we know you.
Forget that one. I'm just kidding. Oh, be quiet, Natalie. Be quiet. We have this has been one of these. If everybody could see what we did prior to this program, they would think we'd all be like in a corner, like in fetal position, shivering, because it was just like one catastrophic thing after another. But we're here. So if you detect a little bit of something in our voices, it's a million emotions. So anyway, we have a title actually to this. This is going to be, it's funny, I said, I don't know where I came with this, where I wrote this. But anyway, this is realizing our autism is what I had wrote down. It's the transformation from NT, neurotypical, to neurodiverse, and that is what we're going to talk about. And I just took 5 minutes to introduce us. So we all have this little cheat sheet here, and we usually have going through Dr. Natalie. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I even introduce everybody? I think I did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, you did, Thomas.
My mind. It takes 3 people. How many autistic people does it take to screw in a light bulb?
One.
Really, we back each other up. Did I just say that? Yeah, you did. Okay, good. We're ready to go. We are going to do this, and I already introduced it. Do you want to start this over? I just feel like I'm... okay, no, we won't. This will be an interesting program with that little additional whatever. And so I'm like completely scattered. So what we're going to do is start on this first question. And we're usually going to go with Dr. Natalie Engelbrecht first, and then Martin, and then I will follow and be number 3. And do you want me to actually read the question, or do we just want to sort of wing it from there?
I think it would be helpful for people with autism to have a definite idea of where we're going. So I think it's a good idea to read the question, but I think, I just think it's clarifying.
Yeah.
Would you like me to read it, Thomas? Okay, looking back on my life from a perspective of autism before diagnosis, do I feel at some level that I knew that there was something major about my life that I was trying to understand? So for me, because I had been diagnosed with complex PTSD, I just kept figuring that was what I had to figure out. My frustration was that as a therapist, my patients with PTSD were responding very well to my treatment, but I kept having these kind of things where I needed time alone, or I would ask my partner to leave the house, and I would do this, kind of dramatic thing that happened that looked sort of like a nuclear bomb when they were out of the house, and that turned out to be meltdowns. So I just really felt like I was different and shameful, and that there was something really fundamentally wrong with me. So I think that was the main thing I was trying to understand, is why was I not getting well, and according to what I was supposed to be doing, and also why I needed this time alone, and why I had these... I definitely had this kind of experience of needing time alone, and just to cry and kind of yell by myself, and I couldn't quite figure out why other people didn't. Martin, what about you?
Well, as a teenager, I went through a lot of confusion in terms of adhering to social conventions. It seemed that people around me and my contemporaries would engage in social contact and so forth, and I didn't have the same social motivation, so I was really confused by that, and I felt like I was masking a lot in order to seem the same as them. But so I felt a stark difference there, and so I really tried to understand why that was, and came up empty for many years. Huh? What about you, Thomas?
Lord.
Sorry, Martin was just asking, what was your experience?
Yes, yes. Well, boy, it was a mess. I look back on it, I'm going, geez, I think that I started off with a very, very dysfunctional father, and that's what I thought the source of everything was. And it was, in a large part, what antagonized everything all the time. So that it always seemed like that was the source of the problem. So that's what I assumed. And the way my father was that I basically didn't even feel I had the right to even to even be introspective to why things were going on. I mean, it was that kind of an isolate, or so that I basically kind of just, I think I kind of shut down and zoned out and just kind of went through the motions most of my as a child. And that was basically whenever I was under stress. If I was in a situation I wasn't, that was my own little bubble that I should be normal in. But I don't know that I knew that. I didn't know if it was something wrong with me. I mean, so in a way, I didn't actually attribute it to a problem, like something that I was having problems with socialization and things, because we were moving around and everything. So I had all these reasons to not think to not even look in the right direction.
Yeah, me too. It seems like Martin, for some reason, and I don't know why, did sort of look in that direction. Like I certainly didn't. You were the one that first pointed that out to me. Why do you think you looked in that direction? Of wondering like that? Yeah.
I'm not sure if I remember correctly, but I think it was your strict adherence to routine and.
No, not so much me, but why? Like because you were the one that pointed out, but out of the three of us, you were the one that figured out much earlier that you were autistic. Remember?
Oh yeah. Well,
why is that?
I guess I just happened on to stumble on a page that described Asperger's syndrome, showed a long list of symptoms, and it seemed almost every symptom described me to a teeth, and so.
But why did you even look at that? Like, what was the reason beyond that?
I really don't recall, but I remember years before that thinking maybe I'm a psychopath or something, because, well, it was also based on ignorance about psychopathy, but it seemed, well, I was just confused why I had this need to mask, whereas other people were just engaging with each other intuitively.
And the alternating empathy, I think, I mean, not all of us, but many of us kind of wonder if is there something psychopathic about us, because we have emotions that are, I don't know, I kind of considered myself a hybrid. Like my emotions are way, way more intense than most people's, unless they're not. And then they're way, way less intense. Thomas, do you find the same?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of parallels with your past and how this all affected you, Dr. Engelbrecht.
You can call me Natalie during the talk.
Okay.
It's just the introduction.
Yes, Natalie. I know. I was thinking as Martin was saying that, and both of you, I thought there was something wrong with me, and that's why my reason my father in a way was the way he was towards me and everyone else. But I took it very personal, I guess. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it does feel very personal, right? Because it's sort of some of the behaviors that we really look at. I mean, Martin and I were just completed the talk on masking, and the behaviors that we sort of mask are the things that we're ostracized for, and what we're ostracized for are, ironically, our autistic symptoms. So we kind of get this message that who we are is not okay, and in order to get jobs, get friends, all of these things, we have to cover up who we are. And I think it's very tragic because, when I look at people with autism, I mean, it's quite ironic. Like I had read a paper on Kantian ethics, which spoke about that in a society, lying only works in a society where lying is not condoned. And yet there's such a high prevalence of lying in our societies, and autistics don't lie. So for myself, sorry, were you going to say something?
Well, there are even autism therapies where children and even adults are taught to lie in certain circumstances in socially appropriate ways.
Yeah, I certainly taught my son to lie because he refused to lie, and I taught him to lie, and somebody thought that was atrocious that I did, but I don't think they quite understood that he was very pedantic, meaning like absolute about not lying. And it's tough. Thomas, you also had spoken, you'd also asked if we felt like we were living a false lie, like a life not centered around our nature and needs, but centering our life around something else. And what do you think, Martin?
I'm not sure.
Not sure? Okay, I've caught you off guard. Maybe I'll speak to that first, and then you guys. So, I mean, I felt like I was definitely living a false life insofar as I had to pretend a lot. I had to pretend that I liked socializing. I was married for 17 years, and certainly in the marriage, attempted to be a perfect wife. And of course, the definition of a perfect wife was what my partner thought a perfect wife was. And I found that I felt very, very depressed in most circumstances, certainly social circumstances. And I remember going out as a family together, and I would sort of pop upstairs to where the kids were, where no other adults were doing that. But I just thought there was something about sitting on the beds and just watching the kids that was much more calming to me than having to be in this situation where I was responding and asking questions that I really didn't care about. It didn't make sense to me. Why talk to these people about things that are irrelevant? And I mean, as far as I understand from research, because I have looked into it, small talk is there to establish certain social boundaries, but even to this day, whatever those social boundaries are is not something I understand. I guess they say that small talk establishes a sort of social hierarchy, many things, perhaps like in terms of like English, I don't know what it's called, but pronunciation, but where the English, based on how they speak, determines their class base, so something like that. But for me, it was this peculiar ritual of getting together and doing these things, really, when all I really liked in the social situations was the new food and kind of watching the kids.
Yeah, that resonates with me as well. Like, I seem to have a larger focus on ideas and activities, and not so much a focus on other people. As a young child, I was very focused on just drawing all the time or reading, so I was always immersed in my own world. But I guess I never thought of it as a false life necessarily. It was just my world, and this was a world that other people were not necessarily privy to.
No, I definitely felt like my life was false. I hated it. It caused me a lot of stress. And Thomas, what about you? Did you feel like you were living a false life?
Yeah. When I was around people, of course, I didn't know it was called masking then, but I was always so self-aware of what I did and how it affected a person. It was that constant attention to that and to everyone, and so it was always that. Matter of fact, I remember a time in my life, probably around my 30s, I said enough. I think that maybe in 30s, maybe late 30s, maybe in 40 even, but that's when I think I started sort of to self-isolate. I sort of said I don't need that. I don't want that pressure. But when I was with myself, I don't think I felt when I was in my own environment, in my own little world. So it was. That's when I had felt. I guess I didn't feel that pressure. I didn't feel false.
Well, I'm just curious about something that you said, which is, what was that sort of turning point for you where you thought enough? Like, why did you suddenly feel enough?
I think it was probably I realized I had control over that. Because I was so on autopilot. I mean, the stuff that I would just hold, I didn't even hold my nose and go through stuff anymore. I mean, it was just sort of like, okay, it it was wherever life took me, I would go. I had a person in high school, and it was a good friend. He said, you have no pride. And it just hit me. It sort of struck me as, because I thought that was a very strange thing to say, but I think I sort of realized what you're saying. I had no self. I was probably some Zen master would have been proud of me because I had no, I did have a self, but you know what I mean? I was just like, I just did not exercise any personal rights in public.
Yeah. I also think about that statement about no pride as in, I think one of the things I very much like about people with on the spectrum is that I do think of them as having no pride, but not in a bad way. I think that certainly for myself, I have no need to be right. I just like information that's correct. So if I'm incorrect, I'm willing to change that. I don't sit and defend things that are incorrect, which I find neurotypicals often do. Like so I don't know. I guess I look at the statement that you have no pride in a more positive way. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess maybe we're more invested in the truth rather than invested in, what is it? Invested in protecting our ideas.
Ideas. Well, do you remember when we wrote that one post and people were talking about it? I think it was on psychopathy and narcissism and how they connect, and then there were people saying that they were having an identity crisis, and I found that difficult to understand, that just like the truth was so disturbing to them, whereas for us I think the truth is just something that adds as information to us, doesn't kind of alter our identity. Yeah,
it's calming. I think even. I think it gives us rest. It gives us peace because it's the truth has to. You don't have to figure it out. It is, and we don't have to process it. Okay, it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that's very valid. And then we were talking about and thinking about, like, one of the things you were discussing with us was the pieces that came together that caused you to figure out that you were autistic. And for myself, that was really just Martin. There were no pieces. I was a neurotypical, and I was speaking to an autistic, and I was going to adapt my language to this human being because I'm forever curious about human beings. And then this human being said, "Oh, I think you might be autistic," right, Martin?
Right. Yeah, you are very routine driven and I guess very focused on certain conventions and making sure that you communicated with me in the right way. And I never met anyone that was so concerned with, how we ought to relate to each other. Mm-hmm. And so that in itself struck me as very, I don't know if it's that necessarily that made me think of autism, maybe more so the routines or maybe all the components together. But I often have this notion that certain people are autistic, and then most of the time I'm right about that. So
yeah, no, I find that you're right about that. I think that quite often the best determinant of whether somebody's autistic is another autistic, because we can kind of sense each other, right? Like there's a comfort.
Because you recognize a lot.
Yeah.
I recognized a lot of the struggles that I went through and things that I already resolved or spent many years on anyway. And so in that sense, I had a few years ahead of Natalie and therefore had the ability to recognize it more readily.
And Thomas, what about you? What were the pieces that came together?
Just to confirm that comment that recognizing, as I learn more about myself, then I start seeing it. Matter of fact, today in the grocery store, just a way a woman looked and kind of looked away, and just her body mannerisms, it struck me. I thought, I think this person's on the spectrum, and I couldn't have done that, of course, a year ago. But the pieces for me, it was a lot of different things that came together. But what the big pieces that made me go look into Asperger's was I had a coworker about 3 or 4 years ago whose son was on the spectrum, and she every once in a while would talk about what they were doing in school for social, learning social skills or communication, whatever. And the more she'd talk about him, the more I'd go, wow, that sounds, there's some connection there. I could not explain it. And I actually said something to her one day. I said, is that possible? I could have Asperger's? And she didn't say no, but I think they kind of looked at me like, you probably were thinking, well, you don't look autistic, ha ha ha. But what really got me to look at it was problems I had at work where I was on the phone with my boss, and I know I had been expressing some discontent with some things, but she, all of a sudden out of nowhere, and it was just like somebody hit me on the head with a hammer or something. It was like I heard her saying, well, I guess you really don't want to work here then, do you? It was just, and it was like, whoa, where is this coming from? And it was so out of place. It hit me so strange. I said, there is something going on here, and with me. And that's when I said, and then it all started to click with the Asperger's that I was talking with my coworker about. And of course, then that's just a lifetime of searching. And but that's what kind of made me look that direction. It made me look that direction.
And then we were talking about you'd asked us like what the missing key was to our life, and I thought about that, and for me, the missing key was not actually knowing I had autism, although that then led to the missing key. For me, knowing I had autism then finally allowed me to find people that I could have successful, secure relationships, people that could answer yes to both of these questions for me. Can I count on you? Yes. And am I worthy of your love? Yes. Because I'd really, with my masking and, the abuse from my past and things like that, I really felt like I couldn't count on people, that I was not worthy of anybody's love. And, Martin came into my life and really just loved me unconditionally, which amazed me during my meltdowns and all difficult experiences. And then I've had the wonderful experience of being part of the groups, both yours and ours, and the people in there are very caring and loving, and it's a wonderful place to not feel shameful. I mean, I was talking to Martin just before this because we had made an error in our recording, and Martin had a meltdown, and I said, well, isn't it great that we're all autistic, so it's fine, nobody's gonna think that that's a big deal. And then you were talking about having a meltdown, and I was doing a little dance saying, yeah, I haven't had a meltdown, just because I usually do. And but I think it's this kind of spaciousness that nobody in these groups finds that we're peculiar. So for me, it was finding a space where can I count on somebody to be there when I'm distressed. And I find in the community, I can always count on somebody to be there for me. They're amazing people. And the answer to, am I worthy of love, of being cared for, I find that the community genuinely cares about me, and I so deeply appreciate that. Martin, what about you?
Yeah, I've also been looking for a sense of belonging, and but maybe for me, there's also a focus just on ideas. Like I really wanted people around me that I could talk with at my same level. There's inherent understanding on a kind of a mutual condition, and so it leaves a lot of space to discuss ideas from maybe autistic perspective, or it's just easier to talk in general, I find.
But I think we also like talking about ideas, and sometimes quite complex ideas. Like a lot of us seem to be into philosophy or come up with different theories, and talking with other people on the spectrum allows us to do that and not be kind of ostracized for those ideas. Thomas, what about you? What was the missing key for you?
Well, as you talk about the community, I'm almost tearing up. I really am, because it's when Martin talked about being that loneliness, that I don't think anyone that hasn't been there can understand. Literally, that it is you. It's like this. You're not being self-centered, but it's just like you're just so alone. You're so isolated, even though you're around people. You're just, and that, as you were, that, I think you explained it right, Natalie, was sort of the key. When I took the Aspie quiz, and it said I was like 149 out of 200, and very likely neurodiverse, and that was like, that's interesting, but it didn't mean anything to me.
Can I interrupt you and ask you what prompted you to take that quiz?
Well, as I was on the internet. Actually, had gotten up like at 4 a.m. and couldn't get back to sleep. So I said, all right, I'm gonna start looking into Asperger's, and I just, randomly was just looking at things, and I came upon YouTube because I like YouTube because you can see it, and and all that. And actually that's how I met Carol. Was that she had her Aspie quiz on there, and I went, and I one of the things that I was in doubt, because I'm going, I remembered, my coworker's son having a lot more in-depth traits and challenges, and I'm thinking, well, that's what I'm going to find. I'm just going to find that this isn't me. And then I saw Carol's video and goes, she looks, I can relate to her. And she started talking about it, so I took the quiz, and but then when I went to the forums and the blogs, and that's what I think it was Martin was saying, the language that people are using, the experience that people are using, the way they communicated, the way, it was just, everything about it was in such a deep connection I had to it, that I had mentioned this before. My adrenaline shot up so high, and it stayed up high for about 3 months. I was going into atrial fibrillations. I had a sustained heart rate of like 150 for not all at 150 all that time. It'd go down at night, but probably stay in the upper 90s, maybe lower 100s. That's why I went to the doctor. And then ended up telling him that I think I'm on the spectrum, and he got the diagnosis set up. But it was a incredibly major physical experience for me.
So a lot of somatic symptoms, right?
I'm sorry?
A lot of somatic symptoms, a lot of physical symptoms. Yeah?
Yes. And still it was a rebirth for me. It was a metamorphosis. It really was. I'm not. It's like the first time I've been alive in my memories, or free to be myself, free to be alive.
That's really amazing. Yeah, I find it interesting because with each person that I speak to that's autistic, the experience is different. Like, it's really been quite amazing watching you go through this metamorphosis, and one of the questions you ask is what was the transition like from neurotypical to neurodiverse? And I often think of the butterfly, and I find that it's such a profound kind of trust, where this caterpillar, I think it's a caterpillar anyways, that makes a papillae for itself and then dissolves into this gel, and the scientists call what's left in there these intention cells, and out of these intention cells you form this new butterfly. So it's not just like sticking legs and wings on a caterpillar. And for me, that's always been a profound kind of statement about healing, that healing isn't just about kind of putting these parts in ourselves, these extensions in ourselves, but it's a complete transformation. And I really see that in your transformation, the way that you're embracing that and working with that. Martin, of course, when I met him, had already embraced who he was, although he was very depressed about being autistic. And for myself, I just didn't have that same struggle because, I thought about that, and probably would have been very much more difficult for me if I hadn't had somebody that was so supportive like Martin. But for me, I was very lucky. I slid into the diagnosis of autism with somebody who truly cared about me and was there to support me, and that helped a lot. What did you find about Martin in terms of, like, for myself, a professional diagnosis was most important in terms of being able to support the community, and I felt that in order to do that, I needed to have a diagnosis, so I got two. But what did you find, in terms of a professional diagnosis and then the transition from, did you transition or did you, I don't know, like, did you transition or did you always just think you were different?
Well, yeah, I never experienced it as a transition, but I also realized that we may have different words to describe these experiences now. Like we have the word neurotypical. When I was young, that word, I don't know if it probably did exist, but I wasn't aware of it. And so I didn't even have a notion of I didn't have a name to refer to the normative psychology, whereas I mean I just had no frame of reference. That is it really. Like I did feel different, but I didn't know in what way, and so I just felt I was probably weird. That's I mean it's a judgmental way to describe yourself, weird. But that's how I felt. I felt like an outsider, and so my diagnosis really. I mean, again, it gave me a name. Suddenly, I was not weird anymore as such. I was just autistic. There was a reason for my eccentric behaviors and the fact that I couldn't quite socially engage with others in a way that they that came naturally to them. And
but eccentric only in terms of neurotypicals, because amongst autistics, you're not eccentric at all. In fact, you're quite boring.
Well, I actually enjoy
Thomas
being
is
eccentric, but not being ostracized on account of it, of course.
Yeah. Thomas, what about you? How did the diagnosis and transition from NT to ND affect you?
Well, the diagnosis, Carol actually has been sort of my Martin in a lot of ways. It was somebody that I knew I did not have to go through this alone. Now, I believe that's true with just the community in general now, and I always tell people that when I'm writing on Quora or something, I'm saying get connected with your community. You got to have your community connection. But see, that was 2 months after I discovered the initial discovery of the autism that I had the diagnosis, and Carol warned me. As a matter of fact, she's told me here recently. She said I was kind of worried for you because I think luckily I had almost a couple months to sort of really intensely study what autism is, because when you're being asked these questions, they're very foreign at first. I mean, do you STEM? No, I don't STEM. It's like...
exactly. This was like me. I don't STEM. I don't have social difficulties. I don't have communication difficulties. It's like, what are you guys talking about, right? Yeah, I find that very interesting, like with certain people when they're sort of wondering, like somebody to suggest to them that they might be autistic, and they're like, well, no, I don't do these things. But it's very tough with the DSM criteria to figure that out, right?
And also we have certain blind spots ourselves, so we often overlook our own symptoms and think it's just like other people. Again, you have only one frame of reference, so sometimes it takes quite a long time to deduce not only that there are differences, but where the differences are exactly.
Sorry, Thomas, we interrupted you in excitement, but please continue.
Oh, I think that's an excellent point Martin made, was that how we have covered up so much in ourselves, we don't see it anymore. And I mean, I used to tap my fingers and stuff. And now I'm looking at it, and now that I'm recognizing it and letting myself do it, it's becoming. I'm stimming all the time. I mean, I'm always doing things with my fingers, and I mean, it's actually very comforting. It's actually nice to be yourself,
very comforting.
And I mean, stimming, we do it to self-regulate anyway, so it's highly conducive.
But it helps to consciously, on a conscious level, know why you're doing it too, because it's like, I remember the one time I was thinking about stimming, and I remember as in school with my legs stimming, and I didn't think the stuff I was doing was stimming, but it was. And I sat there, this is at work on the lunch period, and I did a little bit of rocking, and I went, whoa, this feels good. And it's just bizarre that those mental blocks are we've put up, and to uncover those, and it's a very happy, healthy thing to do, to become yourself.
And I guess you had also asked about like what's been the greatest benefit, like what changed and what's been the greatest benefit. Like for me, honestly, the greatest benefit is not being suicidal, which sounds kind of peculiar. I mean, there are the benefits in terms of, I don't know, maybe that's not the greatest. Maybe it's finding true connection with people. But a huge part of it is that one of the consequences of masking all the time and not even knowing that I was masking and feeling so completely ostracized and different and I really struggled with depression and feeling just that I wanted to end my life and largely that I didn't because of the people who cared about me. But since I'd come to understand who I am, I don't struggle with that in the same way at all. I mean, most of the time, I used to really try to figure out how am I going to get up and wake up and make it through the day without killing myself. And that might sound silly, but it was literally, how do I make it through this day? And now those aren't the major concerns. The major concerns are, for me, really about connecting with others and connecting with Martin and just kind of having a happy life. What about you?
Well, initially after diagnosis, I felt the anxiety so much that I was just very focused on all the negative aspects of autism. And I guess that's also why I felt bad for having autism.
That changed when you met me, right?
Right, that changed completely.
Because why?
Because I guess because I had the support network and that made me more readily acknowledge my talents and I mean there was just a better balance between my challenges and my advantages.
And I think also your challenges, because I shared so many of them, just didn't seem like that was okay. It was just something that I cared about you and
yeah, it really helps a lot that you're not the only one going through these experiences.
Thomas, what about you? Like what's been difficult about in terms of like what's been the benefit for you and how
has it changed you?
Well, I think it's funny. I feel like we're three blind people in a dark room telling what we feel when we touch the elephant. Remember that story?
Yeah, I feel the tail, Thomas.
We're all touching the elephant here, and so when you're talking about certain things, I'm going, yeah. I was in kind of a dark place myself too when all this happened, when the discovery happened, and I think one of the things I guess I would say I was always looking to find peace with myself and with my life. And because the tension, the constant stress and tension of just living seems to have that stress, for some reason, finding out that there was a reason for all this, that has just started to dissipate, and so I guess more at peace with myself, knowing myself, having hope, having feelings like that. Where it's and I think what Martin was saying, it's not that I was a bad person, it's not that I was broken, it's not that all those things, it's just like a fog that a wind comes and just wishes away, and it's like now I can see clearly again. So
yeah, I think you need to put the song "I Can See Clearly" at the end of this, or
yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
And we'd all spoken about, I guess, the most difficult part of the transition for me, and really for me it was having to relearn the language I was born to speak. It's
I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe you can comment on that, Thomas, since you said that.
Me or Martin? I'm sorry.
You, Thomas. Terrific, Thomas.
Goodness, I'm losing the thought. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm lost in thought here in a lot of ways. What was the comment I agreed with?
Well, having to relearn the language I was born to speak. But what do you mean by that? Like learning?
Yeah.
or tendency to be literal, or
Well, it was like when I started speaking to you, I thought you were absolutely rude. And then I realized you were just answering questions, which is my preference, but I learned not to do that. It's that I'd learned to kind of figure out what the person wanted me to say, right? And
yeah.
so when I ask you something like, "Why do you want to talk to me?" Like when you asked me, "Why do you want to talk to me?" I thought, "How rude is that?" Right?
Whereas I really just wanted to know what is the reason that you're contacting me, and that's there was no judgment. There was
Yeah.
I didn't mean anything by it.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So sort of just it's a lot. I feel a lot more comfortable in that whole world now in terms of I just take people on the spectrum as literal.
Yeah, but that has been difficult for me as well, like realizing that neurotypicals actually often mean quite a lot underlying what they actually say, whereas
Yeah.
I'm really focused on what they say. I get confused when what they say isn't actually what they mean.
Yeah. Thomas?
I'm thinking here that the more I just recently, just talking with you, and each person I think I relate to differently. Each person I have to establish that relationship with, and that trust and that communication, and that happened with the two of you, and that is learning. And I think you had said to me a few times, because when we were talking on Messenger, I was still apologetic. I was still very, very careful, and I could feel you saying, "It's okay. It's okay. It's okay." And it was like, okay.
Yeah, it's like,
right.
Just stop, man.
Yeah, we notice that generally that autistic people tend to take things really personally and think that they are wrong, and but often they're not. Like they're really they've become really fearful on account of all the judgments people have given them.
And I really just want to hear what they have to say. And for example, like just something takes longer, so what? Or we did something wrong, so what? It's like it's not a big deal, but there seems to be a lot of heaviness that comes from the, I would say, NT community that we've learned that there's a tremendous amount of fear, right? Thomas?
I'm flashing back almost to the feelings of, see, that was the button my father kept pushing, was that so many, something's wrong with you, and the judgment, the constant judgment, the constant scrutiny, and to where it's just like, if you don't move, then you can't do anything wrong. Well, yeah, you still were doing something wrong, but at least it was less wrong, or something. It's just that tremendous, horrible, horrible pressure of that scrutiny.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And it really has to be a relearning of how to be autistic almost, right?
Oh yeah.
When the language is so normal for us. And I guess the last thing we were all discussing was basically for people who might find that they're on the spectrum, those starting the journey to find themselves, what would you say? And I think Martin, you're probably a really good person to answer this, because I mean you certainly helped me, so I'm gonna put that over to you.
Well, find people that you resonate with, I guess. Find a community that suits you. Embrace who you are, and that is really important. Like, not only acknowledge your challenges and work with those, be constructive about those, but really understand that you have certain benefits as well, that you can contribute in meaningful ways, that you are good enough. And of course, read books and find websites. We have our own website, embraceasd.com.
And Thomas and Carol have a website, the Autism Village. I guess Thomas knows the thing better, but I think it's also important that there are a number of communities out there, and various ones. Like ours is focused on really looking at the superpowers. I think, and there's other communities out there for different reasons. So it's there. I think you should really take a look at a number of different communities and find where you belong. We're all in the spectrum, but depending on where we're on in our journey, we need different things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Thomas?
Say again.
What do you think? What would you say to people who think they might be on the spectrum? You talk about connecting with them, and what would you?
Anybody that's, I think there is, and I can't say this 100% because I haven't met everybody, but everyone it seems so far I've met, there's an internal knowledge, or there's some sort of a core fundamental self-awareness of the autism, and you don't know what to call it, but you know there's something there, and that that those that are pursuing that it's probably not, the answer is probably not going to be exactly what you think, because of all that we've talked about here, the whole transition of thinking you're neurotypical to thinking you're neurodiverse, that you have to undo a whole life of neurodiversity in order to transform or to metamorphosize into your new real self, and that it's a process. It can be a difficult process, but it's the most rewarding process of your life, I think, because you finally get to, in my terms, you finally can have peace in your life.
So what are we going to talk about next week, Thomas?
I think it was your turn to come up with an idea for next week.
Oh,
No,
okay.
no. We'll have to. We actually had said something today that I should have written down, because it was part of what we were talking about. It would have been an interesting topic in itself.
I think maybe meltdowns might be a good idea. Since
Okay.
we all had, well, you and Martin had one today. I'm so proud that I didn't have one.
And this ties into this whole transition. I'm learning what a meltdown is, because I always thought, just like I thought stimming was a certain thing, it's not. It's the whole spectrum. Same thing with meltdown. So it'll be an interesting discussion for sure.
Maybe that's a good idea to talk about what stimming, meltdowns, and shutdowns are next week. How's that?
Sounds great. So next week it's meltdowns, shutdowns, and
Stimming.
yeah, good. Yeah, can. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Lovely to talk to you as usual.
Okay. And it's been a wonderful discussion here. Very emotional for me. And I think it will benefit a lot of people. So I thank you again, Dr. Natalie Engelbrecht, Martin Silvertant. This is Tom Geisler. And this is Discovering Autism. And we'll see you next week with meltdown, shutdowns, and possibly stimming. So thank you all. We'll see you next week.
Thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank you. Bye.